Bibles to 1 Samuel 17, and we're now in the chapter of the Bible that has the most famous story in the Bible, and we're not really going to talk about it this evening. In fact, we're only going to talk about it a little bit in another message. The emphasis here is not so much on the story, but on what's happening in the middle of this story, and we'll be focusing on that more than the facts of the story, for which you probably know pretty well. I want to read verses 1 through 3 and then skip down to verse 12 and read through verse 20. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle and were gathered together at Sukkah, which belongs to Judah, and pitched between Sukkah and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. And those I-M at the end is Im, Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and a valley was between them. And there came out, and we'll skip down to verse 12. I want to skip Goliath. We'll go down to verse 12. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. So Jesse was old, right? Very old. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab and Abinadab and Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this parched corn and these loaves, 10 loaves, and run to the camp of your brothers. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000. And look how your brothers fare, and take their pledge." Now Saul and they, were all the men of Israel, were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went by as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was shouting forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. Years ago, my brother got a car, a navy blue Jaguar, very beautiful. It had a tan leather interior. That was back when leather was actually leather, instead of the leather that's not leather today, that's closer to plastic. And this car was absolutely gorgeous, only it didn't run. Now, it's a Jaguar, but the engine had been replaced by a Chevy engine. And it broke down nearly all the time. I mean, if you saw the car in the driveway of my parents' house, where it spent most of its time, you would think, sitting there, it's the perfect car. It's gorgeous. If you got inside and you could smell the leather interior and see the genuine wood paneling in the car, not the plastic that looks like wood, genuine wood paneling. It was great until you put the key into the ignition. I mean, it was a car long on reputation, short on character. Reputation is what people think you are, but your character is what God knows you to be. To be honest in character means to have integrity. To be honest in reputation is for people to perceive you to be trustworthy. To be consistent in character is to be steadfast. To be consistent in reputation is perceived stability. Reputation is what other people think about you, but your character is who you really are. I think the story of George Washington, it's a fictional story, chopped down the cherry tree. His father discovered the tree chopped down. He said, "I cannot tell a lie." Well, the story itself is a lie. Presidential historians note that not only does every president lie to the American people, some lie a lot. And they even argue that some presidents must lie in order to be effective, something I don't actually believe myself. But even Honest Abe was a skillful liar. One scholar, Meg Mott, political science professor at Marlborough College in Vermont, notes that Lincoln lied regularly about slavery, and he lied about negotiating with the South at the end of the Civil War. Honest Abe had a reputation that he built up through the media of his time, but his character was something different. And I'm not trying to be hard on Abe Lincoln. I'm just saying there's a difference between reputation and character. When God chose David to be king over Israel, he chose a young man who was developing a godly character. In this, we find some lessons, I think, for all of us, but particularly for teenagers and young adults. I think for all of us who are over 50, your character is probably pretty well set. You are who you're going to be. I think the expression is, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. I think that's probably true when it comes to character. But for you who are younger, young adults, teenagers, you have an opportunity still to mold your character into one that's godly, because character matters. In terms of your life, character is everything. You can have a godly reputation, I hope you do, but if you don't have godly character, then in God's eyes, you are significantly lacking. Before we jump into this passage, for a moment, I want to consider a couple of ideas that'll help you get your mind wrapped around 1 Samuel 17, and then we'll look at what we're talking about here. The immediate context of this story is David's battle against Goliath. And I say the Goliath, I call him that because I believe the Goliath is a title and not a name. That's a sermon for another time. I actually preached on this some years ago. If you understand the reason why that's important is because another passage says that another man killed someone named Goliath and talked about how tall he was and all of this, and it seems contradictory. And somewhere online that sermon's available if you want to understand how to interpret those things. The immediate context is David and Goliath. But the larger context is the writer showing that the house of David is actually replacing the house of Saul, and David is replacing Saul as Israel's true leader. So what you have in this story is the importance of character in terms of leadership. Saul wasn't dependable. In fact, the only thing you could pretty much count on Saul to do was not to do what he was supposed to do. He's sacrificing to the Lord, even though Samuel had told him not to. He's not killing off the Amalekites as God told him to do. Saul is not dependable. He's not reliable. Saul is a king who's going to be replaced. He doesn't have good, godly character. But David has good character, and he's developing this character, and you see it in the text. So what I want to talk to you about, preach on just for a moment, is the character of a prince. First, be dependable for the tasks assigned to you. That is, be diligent in your duties. Look at verse 15. David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Now, David had important responsibilities both in his home and in the army. He's in the army. He's likely a courtier to the king. You see that back in chapter 16 and verse 22. He's Saul's armor bearer. And he's also playing his harp for Saul. Whenever this troubling spirit from the Lord would come upon Saul, he would call for David, and David would play his instrument, and Saul would feel better. So he has an important job in the army, but he's also tending sheep at home. He's the one taking them out to graze in the pasture. That's what that word tend means. He's taking care of the sheep. He had the job, and it's really quite an insignificant job. He had the job of a shepherd. So his more important job, and I think probably being a courtier to the king and having this responsibility to help soothe Saul's mind, you'd say that's the more important job of the two. But his more important job did not take away from his less important job. And there's the lesson for us. He is a very important person in the palace of the court of Israel. He's in the royal court. And I think David could easily say, Mom and Dad, this is more important for me. But David doesn't do that. His mind is not neglectful of his job on the family farm. And so here he is, and he's running from field to field. In fact, there's a real question whether he's even ever going home, because he's in the field with the sheep, and then we find out in chapter 17, you go down to verse 54, you find out he's living in a tent when he's with the army. So David's running from tent to tent. I don't know that he's actually ever inside any kind of house. And he could have easily said, this job's more important, that job, get somebody else to do it. But he doesn't do that. He does his duty for his father. So he's diligent in his duties, and you need to be diligent in your duties. You have responsibilities, things people have tasked you to do. You need to do them. There's a reason why when you're younger, you get little responsibilities. Maybe when you're a teenager, mom and dad give you responsibilities around the home, and then you get to be a little older, you get a job, and your employer gives you responsibilities. It's so that when you become a young adult, you'll be able to function in your job, in your office. That you'll be somebody who people say, she's diligent. He gets his work done. If you don't get your work done, if you can't be counted on to do the tasks assigned to you when you're 10 and 11 and 12, then it may be that when you get to be 17, 18, 19, you may not be dependable. And this is not something you can teach. This is something you have to pursue. So be diligent in your duties. I would say also be reliable in your responsibilities. This is all under this idea of being dependable. Be reliable in your responsibilities. Look at verse 20. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd. Do you see that in verse 20? He left the sheep with a keeper, and he went as Jesse had commanded him. He's doing exactly what is expected, regardless of whether he wanted to do it or not. Now, I do believe David saw his responsibilities in the palace as more important. And when you get to reading, what do his brothers accuse him of? You're here because you want to see how the battle is going. You're here because you want to be part of the army, and you're not. You need to go back and do what you're supposed to do. Now, David argues back. There is a cause, and he says, you're not treating me fairly, but he doesn't really refute their argument. David does want to be in the battle. He does want to be in the fray. He wants to defend the honor of God before the Goliath. But he does not leave the sheep unattended. So you can say it this way: be dependable, be someone others can depend upon. You can always count on her. You can always rely on him. David's father gave him an order and expected him to carry it out. You see that? As David had commanded, or as Jesse rather had commanded, there's an anticipation that David will obey Jesse. His father entrusts him to this task, and he fulfills the task exactly as it's assigned to him. So I'm just going to ask you again, young people, are you diligent? I mean, what are we talking about? Doing your homework? Doing your schoolwork? Keeping your room clean? Are you dependable? Are you the kind of person that your mom and dad say, if I need to, I can leave her home alone for a little while I go out to the store. It's fine. I can do that. Or do your parents go, I'm not exactly sure what will happen here. I can't really do that right now. I can't rely on him. I really can't trust her. I'm going to tell you this is how you develop good character. It's right here in your, we call them formative years. You start to lay down the foundation of a good character by saying, I'm going to be a dependable person. I'm going to be diligent in the tasks that are assigned to me. I'm going to do them with my whole heart. As a professor over the last 13 years, I've watched students who I knew were good students. I could read their first couple of assignments, and I knew they were good students. And then I had other students who I thought, well, this is going to be a project, right? Because it was like pulling someone's teeth trying to get them to do anything. And then at the end of the semester, it was, what can I do to fix my grade? Well, you could start over and go back to day one and start doing your homework. Do your schoolwork like it was assigned to you. Do the assignments and do it diligently. Give your best to it. You remember Frank Frausto, he used to joke with me. He said, he said, the thing I got in trouble for the most growing up, he said, my dad called it half-timing. I said, that's kind of an interesting way to put it, Frank. He goes, what does that mean? He goes, my dad always said I was only giving him half the time. Instead of giving him my whole heart, I only gave him half of it. So I'd be a half-hearted effort. I'd only do it part way. I said, that's actually a really good way of describing it. Not a whole time, a half time. You need to be diligent in your duties, reliable, so that other people can depend upon you. And do you know, when you get to be young adults, and some of you are already young adults, you need to be reliable and dependable. You need to be someone that other people say, you can always trust him to do it, because he will. He gave his word, he'll do it. He'll be there, you can count on him. If you can't be that way, then other people will stop asking you to do things. They'll stop asking you to help out. So give your best, work hard, be diligent. Not only should you be dependable, but number 2, you should be submissive to your authorities. This is part of having godly character too. When Aaron was little, he was frustrated with me because I was telling him something to do and he didn't want to do it. And for those of you who know Aaron, he's very, he knows his own mind. I'll say it that way. He has his own mind about things, and always strong-willed. We always had tussles back and forth. Many times he and I were forehead to forehead having conversations. Now, those paid off. Years later, he'll be 27 this summer, which is hard to imagine. But it was just sometimes Becky and I would go, what in the world are we doing? You know, this is incredibly difficult. And I will tell you that this little boy, he's about 5 years old, looks at me and says, I can't wait till I'm older than you and can tell you what to do. And I looked at him, and that's funny. And I'm trying not to laugh out loud at him. And I said, I have really bad news for you. You're never going to be older than me. I will always be older than you. And he could see just the frustration. If you were drawing a cartoon, the kind of smoke coming out of his ears, or the frustration above his head in a thought bubble, he was so frustrated. But part of having godly character is understanding that all your life you will have authorities in your life. And you have to learn at a young age to be submissive to those authorities. And this is important regardless of your circumstances. Would you look again at verse 17? Jesse said to his son David, take this grain, this flour, to your brothers, this ephah of parched corn, these loaves, and run to the camp of your brothers and carry these cheeses to the captain of the 1,000 and look how they're doing, how they're faring. And then he says, Saul of them, and they're in the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines. So you look at this, and David is being sent into a war zone by his dad. How easy it would be to say, now, Dad is great, but he's old. It says Jesse here is considered one of the old men of Israel. He's old. Jesse is really old, and Dad, as he's gotten a little older, maybe he doesn't think through these things like he should. It would be very easy for David to say, I'll do this, but I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. But part of being submissive is realizing it's being submissive regardless of the circumstances you're in. And it doesn't matter how difficult the situation is. Remember the context of war here with the Philistines, and David's brothers are in the camp of Israel, verse 17, and they have a commanding officer over them, verse 18. And David demonstrates courage in being obedient in that situation. The prospects of Israel are grim, and David's situation could also become grim. And how easy it would be for David to give an excuse and say, I can't actually do what my father Jesse is telling me to do, so I'm going to do something different from what he's saying. But instead, what you see here is Jesse simply speaking to his son and expecting his son to do it. So you need to learn to be submissive to your authority, even if the circumstances are difficult. And I would say, secondly, it doesn't even matter how old you are. Obviously, David's situation with his father is going to change. I mean, at one point, we don't know exactly when Jesse dies. It could very well be that David's already king. In fact, by the time David becomes king, David becomes the center of his family. I mean, you would expect that to be the case. It talks about David's brothers after this. It's not Jesse and his sons, it's David and his brothers. And then you have his brothers' children, and they get mentioned from time to time because some of them are good or some of them are bad. But David becomes the center of his family. Why? Because David is one of the most important people of Old Testament Israel. David's the king of Israel. He's the prototypical king. The Davidic covenant's given to him. He's the one who sets up the example of Messiah who would come later. That is Jesus, who will sit on David's throne. So it doesn't really matter how old you are. David is ordered to do this by his dad, and the lesson here is that Jesse knew David would comply. And I think part of that is cultural, sure. So in that culture, right, the father of the family, the patriarch, he's got certain authority even over children who are older, and he can tell them, I want you to do this, I don't want you to do this, and there would be an expectation that there would be compliance. But I think more than that, part of this is just a David thing. It's not just a cultural thing, it's a David thing. David listened to his dad. He obeyed his father. And so Jesse has confidence in assigning the job to his son. And time's going to come when David's going to become the king. And if Jesse's still alive, Jesse will bow to his father, the king. But even then, David will still look at his father as being a position of authority over him. So I say to you, it doesn't matter of the circumstances you're in life. You still need to be submissive to your authority. I would say this, it doesn't matter of the circumstances and how difficult the situation is or how old you are. It's important that you obey regardless of the circumstances. I would say this, obey those that have the authority over you. Look at verse 20. He says down in verse 20, and David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper, with a shepherd. And he took and went as Jesse had commanded him. So he's listening to what his dad is saying to him. He's being obedient to his father. And I would say it this way, boys and girls, do what you're told. Do you know you have one command from God in the Bible? Do you know what it is? One command. Lots of commands for your parents, lots of commands for pastors. I got a bunch of them. You have one command. Do you know what the command is? Children, obey your parents in the Lord. And I've had children say, now what does that in the Lord thing mean? Is there any wiggle room here? No, not really. You're not mature enough probably at your age to figure out what the in the Lord thing there means. That's really more for mom and dad's edification. You need to obey your parents. Going back to the previous point of being diligent, you need to obey your parents when they say to do your schoolwork, and you do it with all your might. It should be that your mom and dad go, I can trust him or her to do the tasks I've assigned to her, I've assigned to him, because I know he or she is diligent. You ought to have that kind of confidence, or they should have that kind of confidence in you. David immediately obeys his dad. He got up, he took the sheep that he was taking care of, and he put them in the care of a shepherd, and then he did what he was supposed to do, as Jesse had commanded him. He did what he was told. And I'm going to tell you, that's going to follow you through life. I was 17 years old. I was working as a roofer during the summer months. You know, I don't know how brain dead I was to think that would be a good job for me. It felt like it's 100 degrees outside, and you're not inside a building, you're on the roof of the building. And we were trying to get rid of the pitch, the tar pitch roof that was on these roofs. And so you've got this big long iron bar, and we're scraping up these roofs. And I knew my boss. I didn't know anybody else there. I knew my boss, and I knew my boss's son. These are the only two people I really knew. And there was an older gentleman there. And my boss had left, and I was doing my best, scraping this. I'd sweated. All the sweat in my body was gone. I had no more sweat left, which is probably bad, right? Is that what dehydration is? I was not no longer sweating and starting to feel really comfortable and dreamlike, but I'm making that part up. But I was working real hard, and this one guy told me he wanted me to leave that roof, and he wanted me to go down and go to another building, and he wanted me to start working on that roof. And I looked at him and said, I don't know you. Who are you? You know, that didn't sit well with my boss, because apparently that was the guy he left in charge over me when he left. Now, if my boss had said, this is what I want you to do, I would have done it. I had no idea who this guy was. He could have been anybody. I was 17. He looked like he was just out of college, but I didn't know him. And he told me to do something. Well, my boss had given me this job. Now, I will tell you that at the time when this happened, my boss, the next day, he chastised me. He laid into me. When that guy tells you to do something, you do it. Then I got to be an adult. And these stories kind of come back to your mind. By the way, Mom and Dad, your children will remember things, and then they get to be adults and they'll start thinking about it. My parents used to say what to me? I remember what this guy said to me, and then all of a sudden I said, that's not fair. That wasn't fair of him to do to me. I didn't know the guy. I was going to obey my boss. Now, if he'd said to me, Matt, while I'm gone, this guy is the boss, you listen to what he says, I would have done that. But he said, you're going to be on this roof, and you're going to be pulling up this tar. And I told him, I'm not leaving this roof until my boss comes and tells me that's what you're to do. And I actually think as an adult, that was the right decision, as weird as that sounds. And as backward as the adults in my life at that time believe. Why? Because I was actually trying to be submissive to my authority. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Follow their instructions. Do what you're told. I love scrolling through Instagram reels. They're funny. You love seeing little bunnies eat strawberries. I could watch that all day long. But I sometimes love the police videos where you see people trying to tell policemen why they're speeding or why they're not going to obey the law, and watch the policeman put them in handcuffs. It's kind of fun to watch. And I cannot believe all these people being unwilling just to do what they're told. Trying to say, I'm from a sovereign country, I'm a sovereign citizen, or I'm not driving, I'm traveling. That's one of my favorites. By the way, none of those work, right? So don't try it. But you're watching people do what you're told. Obey your authority. Be someone who follows instructions well. I mean, you had this in class, right? Where the teacher gave out a test one day and it was really long. And she said, before you do question one, turn it over and do the last question on the test. And you watch, and all the girls would follow the instructions, and all the boys, most of the boys wouldn't. But you remember how it went? You flip the test over, and the last question said something like this. Did you read the assignment, yes or no? And if you say yes, leave the test, and you're done. And you'd see all the girls, they'd click yes, and then they'd put their pencils down, and you're feverishly working through. I don't even remember going over this in class, and because you didn't listen to what the teacher told you to do. Be someone who follows instructions well. Don't be someone who attempts to obey but struggles with instruction. Listen. David listened to his dad. That's part of dependability. So let me ask you, are you submissive to your authority? I guess as you get older, maybe some of that does drop off. But are you submissive to your authority? You have authorities over you. I have authorities over me. We have governmental authorities. We have authorities over us. Are you submissive to your authority? Do you have shake your fist in the face of somebody kind of attitude when you don't get your way? Or do you humbly submit to those who are over you and submit yourselves? Can you be counted upon, or do you make excuses? Do you follow instructions, or do you do things your own way? Going back to my brother's car for just a moment as I close. It sat in the driveway of our house, and my friends would say, Matt, that is an awesome car. I'd say, yeah, Kevin has a beautiful car, doesn't he? Doesn't run, but it's a beautiful car. And all my buddies wanted to drive it. And I say, my brother would love for you to drive it. Could you tell him how to fix the Chevy engine? We weren't mechanics in our family. We had no idea what we were doing. I think he just kept adding oil to the little hole in the top. Just it's overflowing, just pour more in. You can look great. But if your engine is damaged, you won't run. And you could try to build a reputation for being a good and godly person. But if you don't have real good and godly character, then you really won't run when it comes to spiritual things. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this story in the life of David. I thank you that you let us see a little picture into his character and see that as a prince, as a young prince, one who was destined to do great things and become an important character for you, important person in the Old Testament story, that you used this young man even as he was dependable and willing and submissive. So I pray that you'd help us to be that way too. Help us, Lord, to be reliable and dependable, trustworthy. And help us, Lord, to be submissive to authority, to be one who listens to instructions and follows those instructions to the letter. Help us to do that, Lord, I pray. In Jesus' name.